Hello and welcome to another Pyramid Preview. My name is Janten Seitov, and over the next few minutes I'd like to share some of the key findings and highlights from our recently published report looking at the enterprise in emerging markets. The report essentially has two main parts. The first is really looking at and analysing business demographics, so understanding the number of businesses and how that segments down. And then the second part is really looking at how operators can address that opportunity. And a lot of the report is also looking at developed market examples and case studies to provide operators in emerging markets with a template of how they might progress in the future as their market develops. And looking at some of the best practices and case studies from the developed markets. Some of the key questions that the report addresses are as follows. What are the key differences and similarities between enterprises in developed and emerging markets? Do business demographics vary with the level of income? How important is the enterprise opportunity in emerging markets? What are the key verticals in the enterprise segment in emerging markets? What is the best structure for operators to address the business opportunity? What are the key elements of the product portfolio to address the business market? And how can operators best expand their product and service capabilities to address the enterprise market? In terms of defining the enterprise market, there are some issues and challenges because of some overlaps, particularly with the consumer market, typically with smaller companies adopting consumer-based products, and sometimes the other way around. And at the other extreme, products and services which can address both large businesses and the wholesale segment. This report looks specifically at the enterprise market, the formal business enterprise market, so not looking at the wholesale market and not looking at the consumer segment. Although we do look at aspects of informality, which are of course important in many emerging markets. In terms of the segmentation, so we have three kind of broad segments. So the micro enterprise or SOHO segment, businesses with 1 to 9 employees. Then we have the small and medium enterprise segments, 10 to 249 employees. And then the large or corporate business segment with over 250 employees. So that's the kind of overall view, that scope, if you like, of the report. The way we started looking at this report was to look at business density. So really mapping the different countries in terms of their business density, and that refers to the number of businesses per 1,000 of the population. So that's on the vertical axis. With the level of income, with the GDP per capita on the horizontal axis. So we can see kind of three clear clusters of countries, if you like. So there's the Western markets, the higher income markets on the right. So that's typically Western Europe, North America, some developed Asian markets, and typically they have a business density of over 50. Then we have the lower income markets on the bottom left, which typically has a business density of below 50, and that is typically related again to this informality. So typically the lower the level of income, the higher the level of informality, and so there are more informal businesses, and so lower registered businesses or formal businesses. And then we also found this other interesting category in Central Europe, with relatively high levels of business density in some of those markets. And there are a number of interesting factors behind that. In the Czech Republic, for instance, there are a very high number of people who tend to work alone, and there are strong incentives for them to register as a formal business. In some countries, such as Hungary, they've made the process of registering a company very, very easy. So there's a kind of one-stop online portal, if you like, which makes it very easy and low cost to formalize a business. And also interesting, in Poland, we've seen that regulations enable some larger companies to actually require their employees to register for various tax reasons. So there are, some interesting different factors there behind that. The process of business registration is also very important. Typically in lower income markets, the burden of registering a business is much higher on the smaller businesses there. It can be expensive, it can take a long time, it can be very bureaucratic. And also typically in lower income markets, informalities is kind of more accepted, if you like. We've looked at 4 markets in some detail in the report, and we've taken those from each of these segments. So we've taken Germany from the developed side as a benchmark. We're looking at Poland as an interesting market in itself, and to understand some of the dynamics that are going on in those markets. And then in terms of the lower income markets, we look at South Africa and India in some detail. So we're comparing those 4 countries to provide some benchmarks in each of those different categories. The breakdown of businesses by size varies very significantly country by country, and there are a lot of different factors and reasons behind that, and I hope to explain some of those to you with this slide. So first of all, as we saw already, typically the lower level of income, the lower level of business density. So we see, for instance, in the sub-Saharan Africa and some of the lower income African markets, we see a very low portion of smaller enterprises because those are more informal, and consequently a higher portion of large companies, and that can also be driven by the fact that governments, which by definition are formal, tend to be larger companies, so they have a larger portion of employment in large companies. We also have markets such as the Czech Republic, as we saw before, with a very high business density, and conversely, they have a very high portion of smaller enterprises and micro-enterprises. The US, of course, is a unique market in that it has a disproportionately high number of very, very large companies, so companies with 500, 1,000, 10,000 plus employees, hence a very high portion of employment in large businesses. Similarly, in some way to the UK, the high number of financial companies tends to be larger companies. And then also in the middle we have markets such as Germany and South Africa with a very high portion of employment in the SME segment. So, that's just the structure of the German economy with its Mittelstand in the SME segment. The enterprise market is of course a very attractive one in terms of the margins compared to the consumer market. Here we're showing just 3 Western European incumbents which actually provide this level of information. And in each case, Swisscom, Belgacom and KPN, we can see that the business market has higher margins, so it is a more attractive market. Typically in the business market you see higher ARPs, higher voice usage and higher ARPs for broadband, so higher speeds of data connection. Typically the churn rates are much lower, which of course has implications on margins. And typically also business clients tend to need a broader range of products, which also provides some additional opportunities. On the other side of that, of course, is that businesses demand very highly reliable networks. They need good, excellent coverage. They tend to like to have the highest network speeds available. They like to have a broader range of products available. So if an operator is able to provide those things and strong support as well, then they are able to benefit from these higher margins. So there's really the attractiveness of the business market, if you like. The business market typically generates around 30% of total communications revenue, with a big exception really in countries with very high rates of informality. So here we can see, South Africa, Poland and Germany typically have around 30% of their fixed and mobile revenues coming from the business market. But India has a much lower percentage, and that's simply because the very high rate of informality in India. A very, very high portion of employment in India, something like 90%, is in the informal segment. So really very small formal business market to address there. And of course there are implications on how operators should address the market and allocate resources appropriately. Just breaking that down a further level, here we see the breakdown of revenue by product in the 4 different markets that we've looked at in some detail. And the key point which comes across immediately is the higher portion of spending on IT in Germany. and that is typical of more developed markets, Western European markets, North American markets. A higher portion of a business's ICT spending is on IT, and that is typically driven by higher PC penetration, and also the higher incidence of outsourcing, which of course has its own interesting dynamics in terms of developed and emerging markets. It's also interesting here to see that in Poland, the much higher portion of revenue spent on mobile, and that is largely driven again by business demographics, so much higher portion of employment within smaller companies which tend to spend more on mobile. And conversely, in India, a much more smaller formal segment, typically dominated by larger companies which tend to have a higher portion of their expenditure on fixed services. So these are some of the things that are analysed in some detail in the report in terms of breaking these things down and understanding the drivers behind them. Just finally, highlighting the way we've looked at the portfolio of product or the range of products that operators might choose to offer in the business market. So here we're showing the traditional telecoms products and services to the left, so voice and broadband and those kinds of services. And then moving more and more to a kind of IT-focused services, so really moving to computers and standard hardware and software on the right, which tend to be more kind of global markets, lower margin markets typically. So it's very important for operators to decide what kind of products they want to offer. One of the things we looked at in some detail in the report is simply moving from being only a mobile operator to offering a fixed and mobile range of services, and that's all just to the left, but even just offering different fixed services is challenging in itself. It's a different type of sale. Typically a mobile subscription sale is pretty standard, whereas a fixed data sale is more kind of project-based. It has a different life cycle. There are different procurements and different contacts within the business side. So even within that, there are challenges in terms of integrating those. So I think operators need to think very carefully about moving into other IT areas. But of course, there are significant benefits in doing so. Making the business client more dependent on the operator and being able to offer a wider range of products and services to drive the revenue spend per client. So that's hopefully that provides you with some highlights and findings from our recent report. Here you have more my details if you want more information. Many thanks. Goodbye.